As evening falls, Jesus sends Peter and John into the city to prepare for the Passover meal. They follow his instructions precisely, finding a man carrying a jar of water who will lead them to a large upper room. The disciples prepare the room, lay out the food, and make everything ready for the meal, which will be filled with anticipation and solemnity. The disciples gather in the upper room, the air thick with expectation. The room is sparsely decorated, with a large wooden table at the center, surrounded by low benches and cushions. Jesus enters and takes his seat, and the disciples follow suit. A sense of peace settles over them, though they are unaware of the profound significance of this moment. As they begin to eat, Jesus suddenly says, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." The disciples are stunned and begin questioning, "Lord, is it I?" Jesus responds that the one who dips his hand with him into the bowl will be the betrayer. The disciples are filled with shock and sorrow, unable to comprehend who among them would commit such an act. Judas, looking guilty and uncomfortable, quietly asks Jesus, "Is it I, Rabbi?" Jesus answers, "You have said so." The tension in the room is palpable as Judas' fate is sealed. The other disciples are still uncertain of what Jesus means, but Judas is filled with dread. He quietly slips away after the meal, leaving to fulfill his role in the betrayal. In a surprising act of humility, Jesus rises from the table, takes off his outer garment, and wraps a towel around his waist. He begins to wash the disciples' feet. Peter protests, saying, "Lord, you shall never wash my feet." But Jesus replies, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." Reluctantly, Peter allows Jesus to wash his feet. Jesus teaches them the importance of serving one another in love and humility. Jesus takes a loaf of bread, gives thanks, breaks it, and hands it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat. This is my body." He then takes a cup of wine, gives thanks, and shares it with them, saying, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." The disciples partake in the bread and wine, beginning to understand the significance of what Jesus is instituting, though they cannot fully grasp its meaning. Jesus looks at Peter and prophesies, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." Peter vehemently protests, saying, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." But Jesus solemnly affirms his words, and the disciples listen in silence, a mix of shock and sadness clouding the atmosphere. Jesus comforts his disciples, telling them not to be troubled, for he is going to prepare a place for them in his Father's house. He assures them, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." The disciples listen intently, though they are still struggling with the gravity of Jesus' words. He promises the coming of the Holy Spirit to guide them. After the meal, Jesus and his disciples sing a hymn together. This moment of unity is bittersweet, knowing the trials that lie ahead. Their voices rise in song, filling the room with a sacred reverence. The hymn symbolizes their connection and the final moments of peace before the storm of what is to come. After the meal, Jesus takes his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane. He goes a little further to pray, overwhelmed by sorrow and anguish. He prays to God, asking that, if possible, the cup of suffering be taken from him, but ultimately submits to the will of his Father. His disciples, though asked to stay awake, fall asleep. Judas arrives with a group of soldiers to arrest Jesus. He betrays Jesus with a kiss, signaling to the soldiers that he is the one to be arrested. The disciples are in shock, and Peter attempts to defend Jesus by cutting off the ear of one of the soldiers. Jesus, however, tells him to put away the sword, as his time has come. The soldiers seize Jesus and take him away. The disciples, fearful and confused, scatter. Peter follows from a distance but denies Jesus 3 times, just as Jesus had predicted. The scene is one of confusion, fear, and the beginning of the darkness that will